Relatives of those killed in Sacaba keep up their protests as calm returns to most of Bolivia. A court in Peru says the opposition leader Keiko Fujimori should be free. And demonstrations take place all over the world for the International Day to eliminate violence against women. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is from the South. Most protests against the coup in Bolivia have come to an end after an agreement was reached on Sunday to hold new elections. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has the details from La Paz.
Bolivia in general has returned to something like normality. The fuel shortage that has affected La Paz and El Alto for the last 3 weeks has mostly ended. There's still a shortage of some basic foodstuffs like chicken and eggs, but most of the markets and supermarkets are back to normal. The Human Rights Commission of the OAS and the United Nations Human Rights Mission yesterday received testimony in El Alto, in the Sencata neighborhood, where last week 8 people were killed. They took evidence from the relatives of those killed, wounded and arrested. According to the Human Rights Committee of the lower house, there are more than 1,000 people injured and also more than 1,000 who have been detained in the last 2 weeks. Those human rights observers have today gone to Cochabamba, where at least 9 people were reportedly killed in the community of Sacaba, on the outskirts of Cochabamba. The continuous protests we've seen across the country in the last 2 weeks have now almost completely ended. The different social movements have signed agreements with the new government authorities to achieve what these agreements call the pacification of the country and a return to normality. And these agreements also say that in the next 48 hours, the decree which granted immunity to the police and armed forces for acts of repression against the civilian population will be revoked. This is a central point of the agreement signed in La Paz, in El Alto and in Cochabamba. Also in the next 2 days, the Legislative Assembly should draw up the regulations for implementing the law on new elections, which was agreed on Sunday, including the appointment of new members of the Electoral Court. It is these members of the Electoral Court who will be nominated or elected by the Legislative Assembly within the next 20 days, who within 48 hours of taking up their posts will have to call the new elections, which must take place in no more than 120 days after that. So that's the situation in Bolivia today.
We thank Freddy Morales for that report. In the community of Sacaba, outside of Cochabamba, there have been more protests. At least 9 people were killed in Sacaba 10 days ago when the police fired on campesinos and coca growers who were protesting against the coup. As experts from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights arrived to gather evidence, relatives of the victims held a demonstration. They demanded justice for the victims and the continuation of social programs introduced by Evo Morales.
I am demanding justice for my husband, who was killed here. He was shot down. They came to defend democracy and they were killed like dogs. There is no justice for us, and no one is listening to our complaints. The press hides everything. We want those above to go, all of them, including Murillo and that woman. They should all resign.
Peru's Constitutional Court has accepted an appeal to free the opposition leader Keiko Fujimori. The court's decision by 4 votes to 3 should mean that Fujimori is released immediately. She has been in preventive detention for 11 months as she was investigated for alleged money laundering as part of the Odebrecht corruption scandal. Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of the former President Alberto Fujimori and the leader of the Fuerza Popular Party. She will now be able to defend herself in freedom. The Colombian government has deported dozens of Venezuelans accused of taking part in the protests. In what many have condemned as an act of xenophobia, the government of President Iván Duque blamed the unrest on Venezuelans. The accusation is seen as an attempt to deny popular resistance to its neoliberal reforms. 59 Venezuelans are being deported on grounds of national security. Hundreds of women have gathered in the Chilean capital Santiago to commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The women took to the streets as health workers, teachers, doctors and truck drivers held protests ahead on another general strike on Tuesday. After more than 5 weeks of protests, feminist movements gathered against the government's lack of gender policies and demanded the resignation of the Minister for Women, Isabel Pia.
There is a history of impunity for gender violence under the dictatorship, which has never been recognized and which has continued throughout these years of so-called democracy. Every time the police arrest and abuse high school students during the recent protests, it shows clearly how state terrorism attacks and abuses our bodies. This is a very important issue for us, and that is why we think the Minister Pia must resign, but also why President Sebastián Piñera should also resign.
And Mexican women have used art to protest rampant violence against them in their country. At the Angel of Independence monument in Mexico City, women painted over a protective barricade. Others crocheted purple and pink hearts to string up. The barricade was erected after feminists defaced the statue with graffiti in August to decry alleged rapes by police in the capital, as well as high rates of gender-based killings. On average, 10 women are murdered each day in Mexico, making it one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a female. The threat of violence is compounded by impunity for most perpetrators. Fewer than 1 in 10 murders are solved in Mexico.
We understand the heritage and culture as something to preserve. We also understand that anger is a manifestation to point out and highlight a more important situation that has been over us, that of femicides.
The legacy of revolutionary and politician Fidel Castro is being celebrated on the 3rd anniversary of his death. In Cuba, several activities were held in honor of the historic leader of the Cuban Revolution. Castro's involvement in liberation struggles, both in his country and across Africa, have not been forgotten. His outright defiance of imperialism, and more specifically Washington, was also an inspiration to many. 3 years after his passing, Castro continues to hold a place in people's hearts and minds. Let's take a look back at an excerpt of the Cuban leader's powerful speech back in 1966.
En nuestras costas y en nuestras tierras, el mismo que ataca a los demás. Y por eso decimos y proclamamos que con combatientes cubanos podrá contar el movimiento revolucionario en cualquier rincón de la tierra.
And Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel paid tribute by posting on his Twitter account how to remember Fidel, assuming his legacy as his own, confronting imperialism with courage and firmness, working and thinking for the people, fighting because a better world is possible. Coming up after the break, thousands of women march in Ecuador to demand justice for victims of gender-based violence. Stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en el.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur. Welcome back to From the South.
Thousands of women in Ecuador have gathered in the capital, Quito, to demand justice for victims of gender-based violence. According to official statistics, at least 93 women have so far been killed in Ecuador in 2019.
Well, we live in a macho society. This day has been created so that people begin questions both the society and themselves. And this way they can contribute to elimination of violence against women.
Although many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have policies to curb violence against women, it still persists and is practiced with relative impunity. According to a November 2017 United Nations Development Program report, the region has the highest rate in the world of gender-based sexual violence. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean found that on average 12 women are murdered a day across the region. To halt this problem, the report recommends addressing women's protection issues at a higher political level with more investment. Meanwhile, sexual assault and harassment at tertiary institutions form part of a conversation on gender violence at UWI's Mona campus in Jamaica. The university, in conjunction with the Edna Malley College of Performing Arts, hosted a symposium to raise awareness and trigger action. From 2010 to 2012, there were 67 reported cases of violence against women on Mona campus, including 5 cases of rape. All this comes in the wake of allegations leveled by a student against a senior male lecturer at another institution, the Edna Malley Fine Arts School, where there have been almost 20 other students complained of sexual harassment.
It might appear to some a sort of irony that the college is currently embroiled in a sexual harassment controversy involving cases of sexual harassment against a member of faculty. It is this very reason that we as an institution find it crucial to ensure our voice is a part of the conversation. I must state unequivocally that the college does not condone sexual or any other form of harassment and is committed to providing an academic and work environment that is free from discrimination, victimization, and professional misconduct.
In the Dominican Republic, thousands have marched to protest against gender-based violence. More than 100 social organizations gathered in the Mirador Sur Park in the capital Santo Domingo City to demand measures that guarantee the safety of women. They also called for policies that ensure gender equality at various walks of life and also as a subject taught in schools. In other news, makeshift barricades have gone up throughout Haiti's second largest city, Cap Haitien, just ahead of fresh protest action. Old shipping container trailers and tractors have been used to block access to the main road in the island's center department. It's the latest round of demonstrations demanding Jovenel Moise's resignation amid corruption allegations. The past few weeks of protests are the culmination of more than a year of turmoil and almost 3 years of discontent with Moise. Demonstrators have also sent a message for the U.S. and the international community. Stop propping up the Moise government. And Haiti's second largest city has been hit by severe flooding. Water swept through the streets of Cap Haitien over the weekend, submerging vehicles and causing severe damage to infrastructure. Poor drainage and sewage systems are said to have contributed to the deluge. Fortunately, no deaths or major injuries were recorded. One of Trinidad and Tobago's most passionate advocates for prison reform has passed away. Wayne Chance, the founder of NGO Vision on Mission, died of cancer on Sunday evening. He was the recipient of several distinguished awards, including the Hummingbird Silver in 2010 for community service. Chance was a former inmate who turned his life into a mission for former convicts. He provided temporary shelter and aftercare for thousands of former inmates who society would have otherwise discarded. Chance's experience behind bars and his advocacy for improvements to the prison system made him a significant force in his country. In Dominica, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has announced interference sponsored by the Organization of American States to delegitimize upcoming general elections. Skerrit denounced attempts by the OAS to interfere in the internal affairs of the island, rejecting attempts to generate violent acts within the country intended to harm the December 6 general elections. This comes after the OES Secretary General Luis Almagro said that free and fair elections would not be held in Dominica. This is what Scary responded.
Those elections will be free and fair, despite your lies, despite your nastiness, despite your attempts to sow seeds of destruction, and despite your attempt to have outside meddling. And we say, hands off Dominica.
The chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown is questioning the practicality of implementing electoral reform in Dominica. Brown says that there is no constitutional crisis in Dominica, while he suggests it would not be feasible to make electoral changes with less than 2 weeks to the country's general elections. Last week, opposition-led protesters demanding electoral reform clashed with police in Rousseau. Antigua's leader says he also doesn't believe it's practical to extend elections beyond December 6 because, according to him, if the polls go beyond the 5-year constitutional requirement, then a crisis could ensue. Prime Minister Gaston Brown is promising a positive solution to issues surrounding the planned sale of Scotiabank branches in Antigua and Barbuda. Trinidad-based Republic Bank Holdings is seeking to acquire Scotiabank operations in several Caribbean countries, but Antigua had expressed reservation about the proposed sale, saying it was interested in buying the island's Scotiabank Holdings itself alongside a local consortium. After a meeting with bank officials, Prime Minister Brown says he's confident the matter will be settled in a few weeks and to the satisfaction of all stakeholders. The United Nations has called on countries to honor their pledges to reduce carbon emissions as greenhouse gases in the atmosphere hit a record in 2018. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the year-on-year surge in methane, a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, was the highest in the last 20 years. For nitrous oxide, which contributes to ozone destruction and exposes us to harmful ultraviolet rays, it was the highest ever. This comes as large greenhouse gas contributors like the United States and Brazil withdrew from the 2015 Paris Agreement.
We have again broken records in carbon dioxide concentrations, and we have already exceeded 400 ppm level, which was regarded as a critical level. That happened already 2 years ago, and this growth of carbon dioxide concentration continues, and last year's increase was about the same as we have been observing during the past 10 years as an average.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. 200 people were injured when Turkish police fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse women protesters rallying against gender-based violence. Riot police used force to break up the demonstration in Istanbul, where hundreds of women demanded an end to impunity for those guilty of gender violence. A report drafted by the Umut Foundation revealed that at least 347 women were killed in Turkey, and that's only in the first 9 months of 2019. Turkish rights defenders criticize the fact that killers or abusers can receive reduced sentences for, quote, good behavior, or if they claim provocation.
If these security measures would be taken when women go to the police and ask for protection order, we know that there will be less femicide, so that we are depending on our own solidarity.
Protesters have flooded the streets of more than 30 cities around the world, including Madrid. Thousands of people have demonstrated against sexual violence in Spain's capital. They marched under the slogan, Machismo Kills. Also in Barcelona, the country's second largest city, about 10,000 people also took part in the rallies against gender-based violence. And Nigeria has launched its first national sex offenders register. The register will contain the names of all those prosecuted for sexual violence in Nigeria since 2015. The record will be available online to better help the public, state bodies, and police conduct background checks and identify repeated offenders. According to the United Nations, 1 in 4 Nigerian women are sexually abused before they turn 18, with the majority of cases not prosecuted.
And the Sexual Offenders Register is a register that has the details of all sexual offenders where the public has access to. You can access the register, you know those who raped, those who are pedophiles and all of that. What this does is that it promotes the name and shame policy. A lot of people don't want the bad deeds they've done to be out there for the public to see, but this is going to name and shame you. Everything about the offender is going to be there.
Moving on, the Arab League has rejected the United States policy shift on Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abdul Gate said that the U.S. decision to no longer consider Israeli settlements as a violation of international law was a threat to the Middle East peace process. The Trump administration's decision drew praises from Israel, but condemnation from the European Union, Palestinians, and Arab leaders.
What is really disturbing about this announcement is its negative impact on any hope to reach peace in the future. Legitimizing settlements implicitly acknowledges the reality of the occupation. On which basis would the Palestinians negotiate with Israelis if this occupation does not exist, and that there are no occupied lands or settlers taking over lands?
London has refused to renew the operating license for ride-sharing giant Uber over safety and security concerns. Transport for London, commonly known as TfL, has made the decision because they found a pattern of failures, including trips that took place with unlicensed, suspended, or dismissed drivers. Uber, which has 3.5 million customers and 50,000 drivers in London, described the move as wrong and added that it will appeal. While London's traditional black cab drivers welcomed the ruling, the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain said it will be the drivers working under precarious conditions who will suffer from the decision and not the U.S. giant.
It will be very, very bad news for me, and not for me, for all of us. I mean, for the drivers, Uber drivers. So I don't know. Probably I'm gonna sell the car because I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stay on the road without any incomes, absolutely nothing. So we'll see. I don't know. Still, I don't know. But hopefully everything will be okay for us.
Meanwhile, London Mayor Sadiq Khan has suggested that Uber drivers affected by this decision should direct their anger to Uber, as the U.S. giant was responsible to ensure the safety of their users.
That have been identified. There are at least 14,000 journeys where somebody using Uber has thought the person driving them was one person, but in fact it's been somebody else. There have also been examples where drivers who've had their license suspended or dismissed have been allowed to continue to be an Uber driver. These are serious failings.
Thousands of teachers in Croatia have taken to the streets to protest over low wages. The protesting teachers and their supporters rallied in the capital Zagreb for the 7th consecutive week since the strike started in October. The country's primary and secondary school teachers launched the strike to call for higher wages. The nationwide protest saw many schools getting closed.
I've been teaching Croatian for 25 years. Throughout this period, we have not succeeded in aligning our salaries with those of other sectors of the civil service in Croatia.
Italian authorities have finally agreed to grant the Open Arms migrant rescue ship access to a port. The 62 African migrants on board were seen dancing and singing after crew members announced that they were going to be disembarked on Tuesday. Initially, Italian authorities refused entry for the group of migrants who were saved from a rubber dinghy about 70 kilometers off the coast of Libya. Among the group, there were 3 women, 2 toddlers, and 24 unaccompanied minors.
The situation in our countries are devastating. We cannot stay there to watch our families in such difficult situations. That's why we take this journey. For our family, we go to Europe to find formation, work, and improve the life conditions of our families.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.
Discover the